The morning started like any other in the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. Ambassador Zethkar adjusted his ceremonial robes and reviewed the daily reports from across the galaxy. Trade disputes between the Corvan Republic and the Celestial. Hegemony filled most of the documents. Standard territorial disagreements occupied the rest. Nothing seemed unusual until he reached the human sector reports. Colony Alpha 7 had missed its weekly check-in. The mining station at Kepler 442 showed no activity on the sensors. New Eden's massive spaceport registered zero traffic for 3 consecutive days. Zethkar frowned and called up more detailed scans. The readings made no sense. The colonies weren't destroyed or damaged. They were simply empty. Meanwhile, Admiral Jake Harrison stood in the command center of the massive transport ship Liberty's Dawn. Through the reinforced windows, he watched the last evacuation shuttles dock with the fleet. Earth hung in the distance, like a blue jewel, but Jake felt no sadness. This moment had been planned for 3 years. Every detail had been calculated and prepared. The evacuation of humanity from galactic space was the largest logistical operation in known history, yet no other species had noticed it happening. Human colonies across 17 sectors had been quietly emptied over the past 6 months. 23 billion people had been moved to transport ships so advanced that galactic sensors couldn't detect them properly. Dr. Lisa Martinez finished uploading the final scientific databases to the fleet's quantum storage systems. She had spent 2 years ensuring that every piece of human knowledge would survive the journey. Medical research, engineering blueprints, historical records, and artistic works were all safely stored in crystalline matrices that could last for millions of years. The plan had begun during Lisa's time as Earth's representative to the Galactic Science Council. She had watched alien scientists dismiss human research as primitive and unworthy of serious consideration. They never realized that humans were sharing only their most basic discoveries while keeping their advanced work secret. The quantum storage technology she now used was centuries ahead of anything the galaxy possessed. Captain Ryan Walsh piloted the final evacuation shuttle from Luna Base. His cargo bay held the last group of human civilians, including children who had never known any home except the moon. Ryan had volunteered for this final run because he wanted to be the last human to leave the solar system. It felt like closing a book that had been writing itself for thousands of years. Behind them, automated systems began the careful process of dismantling every human installation. Luna Base would be completely removed within 72 hours. The massive mining operations in the asteroid belt would be packed away or recycled. Even the smallest research stations would vanish without a trace. When other species finally investigated, they would find nothing but empty space and clean planets. The Galactic Council had been debating new restrictions on human trade for months. They complained that humans were too aggressive in their business practices and too independent in their political decisions. The latest proposal would have limited human colonies to only 3 sectors and required all human scientific research to be shared immediately with the Council. Ambassador Zethkar had supported these restrictions because he believed humans needed to learn their place in galactic society. Like most Council members, he saw humanity as a young and reckless species that required careful guidance from their more civilized neighbors. The idea that humans might simply leave had never occurred to him. President Elena Rodriguez recorded her final message from the Oval Office before boarding the last transport from Earth. She had led the secret negotiations that made the exodus possible. For 3 years, she had smiled and nodded during council meetings while human engineers prepared the most advanced fleet in galactic history. The decision to leave hadn't been made in anger or desperation. Human analysts had studied galactic politics for 50 years and reached a simple conclusion. The Council would never accept humanity as equals. They would always see humans as junior partners who needed supervision and control. Independence was the only path to true freedom. The transport ships used technology that made galactic vessels look like ancient sailing ships. Human scientists had developed faster-than-light travel methods that didn't require the massive energy systems other species used. Dimensional folding allowed the fleet to carry entire cities' worth of people and equipment in spaces that seemed impossible. Dr. Anthony Garcia supervised the medical evacuation from the hospital ships. Every human patient had been carefully moved to advanced medical facilities aboard the fleet. The doctors and nurses who had served on alien worlds were coming home to help build something new. Anthony knew that galactic medical systems would struggle without human expertise, but that was no longer humanity's responsibility. Commander Helen Foster monitored galactic communications from her position on the command ship Destiny's Call. The first confused reports were starting to reach Council headquarters. Trade ships were finding empty human ports. Diplomatic messages were going unanswered. Within days, the galaxy would realize that humanity had vanished completely. The human fleet consisted of over 2,000 ships of various sizes. The largest vessels carried entire cities with their own parks, schools, and recreation centers. Medium ships transported industrial equipment and manufacturing systems. The smallest ships were packed with supplies and equipment that would be needed to establish new colonies. Navigation systems pointed toward the galactic edge, but their true destination lay far beyond known space. Human astronomers had identified star systems in the void between galaxies where new worlds could be built without any interference from galactic politics. The journey would take several years, but the ships were designed to support their populations indefinitely. As the last shuttles docked and the fleet prepared to depart, automated beacons activated across former human space. The messages were brief and translated into every major galactic language. They simply stated that humanity chose to seek their own path among the stars. No explanations were offered, no forwarding addresses were provided. The Galactic Council would convene an emergency session within 72 hours to discuss the crisis. By then, the human fleet would be beyond the reach of any galactic technology. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and unpredictable had quietly accomplished something no other civilization had ever attempted. Jake Harrison gave the order to begin the final phase of departure. The massive fleet turned away from the galaxy that had been humanity's home for 2 centuries. Behind them, empty worlds spun in their orbits like abandoned playgrounds. Ahead lay the infinite darkness of intergalactic space and the promise of absolute freedom. The exodus was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began 3 days after the last human ship disappeared from sensor range. Ambassador Crethon of the Celestial Hegemony stared at the holographic display showing empty star charts where human territories once glowed with activity. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the quiet hum of life support systems. Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Trade Federation was the first to speak. His voice carried a tremor that betrayed his growing panic. The shipping routes through human space had been the backbone of galactic commerce for over a century. Without the relay stations that humans had built and maintained, cargo ships were stranded across 17 sectors. Trade between the major powers had ground to a complete halt. Commander Helen Foster sat in the communications bay of the human fleet, monitoring the frantic transmissions flooding galactic networks. The intercepted council meetings painted a picture of confusion and growing desperation. What the galaxy was slowly discovering was how deeply human influence had penetrated every aspect of their civilization. The humans had been the invisible foundation holding everything together. The first major collapse came in the industrial sector of the Corvin Republic. Their massive manufacturing complexes had been designed by human engineers 50 years earlier. The intricate systems that controlled atmospheric processors, gravity generators, and waste recycling had all been built using human mathematical models that no other species fully understood. When the automated systems began failing, there was nobody left who knew how to fix them. Dr. Anthony Garcia reviewed the medical crisis reports from his position aboard the fleet's medical command ship. The plague of Andromeda was spreading again across the Outer Rim territories. Human doctors had developed the only effective treatment 3 years earlier, but the galactic medical community had dismissed it as crude biological manipulation. Now their people were dying while they desperately tried to recreate the human cure. The atmospheric processors on 14 different worlds began shutting down within the first week. These massive machines had been humanity's gift to worlds with toxic atmospheres, allowing millions of aliens to live on planets that would otherwise be uninhabitable. The human engineers who designed them had built in safeguards and redundancies that other species considered unnecessarily complex. Without regular maintenance from people who understood the systems, the processors were failing one by one. President Elena Rodriguez watched the crisis unfold from the observation deck of Destiny's Call. She felt no satisfaction in seeing the galaxy struggle, but she couldn't ignore the vindication. For decades, the Council had treated human contributions as minor additions to galactic civilization. They were learning too late that humans hadn't been followers, but leaders who had chosen to work quietly behind the scenes. The banking crisis started when the Nexus Financial Consortium realized that their economic models had been created by human mathematicians. The complex algorithms that prevented market crashes and predicted trade fluctuations were based on human understanding of chaos theory and probability mathematics. Without the human economists who had been subtly guiding galactic markets for generations, the entire financial system began to collapse. Captain Danny Walsh monitored the communication networks as desperate messages flooded the emergency channels. The Corvin military was reporting that their defensive systems were offline. The energy shields protecting their major cities had been designed using human plasma physics research. The backup systems were failing because nobody else understood how to calibrate the field generators properly. The medical situation grew worse as the weeks passed. Human physicians had been treating 17 different species for conditions that their own doctors couldn't cure. The humans possessed an unusual ability to understand biological systems across species barriers, finding connections and solutions that escaped other medical professionals. Hospitals across the galaxy were overwhelmed with patients suffering from diseases that only human doctors knew how to treat. Dr. Nicole Baker analyzed the diplomatic breakdown from her position in the fleet's political intelligence unit. The DITA carefully maintained peace between the Celestial Hegemony and the Corvin Republic was cracking. Human negotiators had been mediating their disputes for over a century, finding compromises that neither side would accept from anyone else. Without human diplomats to maintain the balance, old conflicts were resurging with dangerous intensity. The transportation crisis reached critical levels when the hyperspace jump gates began malfunctioning. The gates had been upgraded with human technology that improved their efficiency by 300% and reduced travel time across the galaxy. The upgrade systems were so advanced that galactic engineers couldn't figure out how they worked, much less how to repair them when they broke down. Security Chief Brandon Kelly's intelligence reports revealed the scope of human involvement in galactic affairs. Humans had been quietly preventing wars, solving technical problems, and maintaining systems across hundreds of worlds. They had done this work without seeking recognition or reward, believing that helping others was simply the right thing to do. The galaxy was discovering that their civilization had become completely dependent on human knowledge and expertise. The agricultural systems on 12 farming worlds collapsed when the crop management computers failed. Human biotechnicians had developed sophisticated programs that optimized soil conditions, controlled pest populations, and maximized crop yields. The computer systems were so advanced that they seemed almost magical to other species. Without human technicians to maintain them, the programs shut down, and crops began failing across entire continents. Ambassador Zethkar found himself facing the most serious crisis in galactic history. The council chambers echoed with arguments and accusations as member species blamed each other for driving humanity away. The Zephyrian Trade Federation accused the celestial hegemony of being too restrictive. The Corvan Republic claimed that everyone had underestimated human capabilities. Nobody wanted to admit that they had all been equally blind to human importance. The power grid failures began in the third week. Human electrical engineers had designed the energy distribution systems for most major galactic colonies. Their work had been so reliable that other species had forgotten how complex the systems actually were. When transformers began overloading and power plants started shutting down, the aliens discovered that they couldn't even read the technical manuals that humans had left behind. Commander Helen Foster intercepted the most desperate transmission yet. The Council was offering full membership to humanity with complete voting rights and territorial autonomy. They were willing to grant everything that humans had requested for decades, but only because they were facing the collapse of galactic civilization. The irony wasn't lost on anyone aboard the human fleet. The galaxy was learning that humanity hadn't been the primitive junior partner they had assumed. Humans had been the advanced civilization, choosing to share their knowledge freely while keeping their most sophisticated technology hidden. Now they were gone, and the galaxy stood at the edge of chaos without them. 6 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council authorized deep investigation teams to explore the abandoned human installations. What they found in the empty laboratories and research facilities changed everything they thought they knew about human civilization. The discovery began on Luna Base when archaeologist Thekmar stumbled upon a hidden laboratory buried 3 levels below the main research complex. The laboratory contained equipment that defied every known principle of galactic science. Professor Kevin Thompson had been humanity's most overlooked scientist, dismissed by his alien colleagues as a simple engineer who worked with basic mechanical systems. The data files he left behind revealed theoretical frameworks that advanced galactic understanding by several centuries. His work on quantum tunneling and dimensional mathematics was so sophisticated that the galaxy's best scientists couldn't even comprehend the basic concepts. Senior investigator Mira Chen led the analysis team studying the abandoned human research facilities across 17 sectors. Each location revealed more evidence that humans had been far more advanced than they had ever revealed. The technologies they had shared with galactic civilization were apparently the simplest examples of their capabilities. Hidden beneath every human installation were research projects that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. The most shocking discovery came from Dr. Amanda Phillips's private laboratory on Earth. Her published papers had always seemed slightly ahead of galactic scientific understanding, but her private research revealed work that was centuries beyond anything other species had imagined. She had been developing faster-than-light communication systems that operated through dimensional folding, energy manipulation techniques that could power entire star systems, and biological enhancement technologies that could extend lifespans indefinitely. The Council's Science Division faced an uncomfortable reality when they examined the human databases. Every major scientific breakthrough in galactic history over the past century had been subtly influenced by human research. The aliens had believed they were making independent discoveries, but careful analysis revealed that human scientists had been quietly guiding their colleagues toward specific conclusions without taking any credit for the guidance. Dr. Lisa Martinez had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Medical Council for 15 years. Her colleagues had always appreciated her practical approach to biological problems, but they had never realized the depth of her knowledge. The medical files she left behind contained cures for diseases that the galaxy considered incurable. Her research into genetic manipulation and cellular regeneration was so advanced that it seemed like magic to other species. The engineering discoveries were equally stunning. Human architects had designed buildings that incorporated gravitational field manipulation, allowing structures to exist in impossible configurations. Their transportation systems used energy sources that other species couldn't identify, much less replicate. The simple fusion reactors that humans had shared with the galaxy were apparently primitive compared to the power generation systems they kept for themselves. Security Chief Brandon Kelly's intelligence files revealed the most disturbing truth of all. Humanity had been preparing for departure for over 50 years, ever since first contact with galactic civilization. They had observed the Council's treatment of other species, studied the patterns of galactic politics, and concluded that true equality would never be offered. The entire human participation in galactic society had been an extended information-gathering operation. The military implications became clear when investigators examined human defensive systems. The planetary shields that protected human colonies had been powered by technology that operated on principles the galaxy didn't understand. Human warships had appeared to use standard weapons and propulsion systems, but hidden compartments revealed advanced armaments that could have destroyed entire fleets. Humanity had been capable of conquering the galaxy at any time, but had chosen peaceful cooperation instead. Admiral Jake Harrison's personal files contained strategic analyses that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of every major galactic military force. The humans had identified weaknesses in alien defensive systems, calculated optimal attack strategies against all potential enemies, and developed countermeasures for every known weapon technology. They had been prepared for war while consistently choosing peace. The archaeological teams discovered that human cities had been built using architectural principles that incorporated advanced materials science. Buildings that appeared to be made from simple metal and concrete actually contained molecular structures that were self-repairing and incredibly durable. The humans had been living in cities that were essentially indestructible, while allowing other species to believe they used primitive construction techniques. Commander Helen Foster's communication logs revealed that humans had been monitoring all galactic transmissions for decades. Their listening posts had been disguised as simple relay stations, but they contained sophisticated intelligence-gathering equipment that could intercept and decode any signal in known space. The humans had possessed complete awareness of galactic politics while appearing to be naive newcomers to interstellar affairs. The economic files painted a picture of careful manipulation spanning generations. Human economists had been subtly guiding galactic markets to prevent catastrophic crashes and maintain stability. They had possessed economic models that could predict market behavior years in advance, allowing them to make investments that seemed lucky but were actually based on superior mathematical understanding. The agricultural discoveries were particularly impressive. Human farming techniques that had seemed simple and traditional actually incorporated advanced biological engineering. Their crops were genetically enhanced to be more nutritious and resistant to disease, but the modifications were so subtle that other species hadn't detected them. Human food production had been feeding much of the galaxy through exports that appeared to come from naturally superior farming methods. President Elena Rodriguez's personal archives contained detailed studies of every galactic species. The humans had understood alien psychology, biology, and culture better than the aliens understood themselves. They had used this knowledge to become perfect diplomats and negotiators, finding solutions to conflicts that seemed impossible to resolve. The transportation technology hidden in human facilities was the most advanced discovery of all. The ships that had carried humanity away from the galaxy operated on principles that made galactic vessels look like primitive sailing boats. Dimensional folding technology allowed them to travel vast distances instantly while carrying impossible amounts of cargo in spaces that seemed far too small. The investigation teams realized that humanity had been the most advanced civilization in galactic history. They had chosen to hide their capabilities and work quietly to improve life for all species. The galaxy had dismissed them as primitive newcomers, while they were actually ancient masters of science and technology who had decided to share their knowledge freely without seeking recognition or power. The council members sat in stunned silence as the reports poured in from investigation teams across former human space. They had lost the most valuable allies they could have ever hoped to. fined, and they had driven them away through ignorance and prejudice that now seemed unforgivably stupid. The galactic economy entered complete freefall within 8 months of humanity's departure. The Nexus Banking Consortium discovered that human economic models had been preventing market crashes for over 40 years. Without the sophisticated mathematical frameworks that human economists had quietly maintained, financial systems across the galaxy began collapsing in ways that seemed impossible to stop or predict. General Patricia Adams monitored the chaos from her command position, aboard the human fleet, now safely established in their new home beyond the galactic edge. The monitoring stations showed 17 major star systems declaring bankruptcy as their economies imploded. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries were breaking down as the complex logistical networks that humans had designed and maintained simply stopped functioning. The first major war erupted between the Celestial Hegemony and the Corvan Republic just 10 months after the Exodus. Colonel Stephen Wright's diplomatic corps had been the invisible force preventing this conflict for over 2 decades. Without human peacekeepers to mediate their ancient territorial disputes, both sides reverted to aggressive posturing that quickly escalated into open combat across 3 star systems. Dr. Nicole Baker led humanity's observation teams as they watched galactic civilization fragment in real time. The careful balance of power that had maintained peace for 2 centuries was collapsing without human intervention. Species that had coexisted peacefully were now viewing each other with suspicion and hostility. The diplomatic frameworks that humans had built were crumbling because nobody else understood how to maintain them. The Zephyrian Trade Federation lost 60% of their shipping capacity when the hyperspace relay network failed completely. Human engineers had designed backup systems and maintenance protocols that were so advanced they seemed like magic to other species. When critical components began failing across the network, alien technicians discovered they couldn't even identify which parts needed replacement, much less figure out how to repair them. The medical crisis reached catastrophic proportions as plagues spread unchecked across the Outer Rim territories. Human doctors had been the only medical professionals capable of treating cross-species infections and developing vaccines that worked across multiple biological systems. Without their expertise, diseases that had been contained for decades were now spreading from world to world faster than any known cure could be developed. Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded the exploration fleets that had discovered new star systems far beyond the galactic rim. From their position in the void between galaxies, humanity watched their former neighbors struggle with problems that human science could solve easily. The irony was not lost on anyone in the fleet that they were now more advanced and secure than the civilization that had rejected them. The industrial collapse accelerated when the automated manufacturing systems began shutting down across major production centers. Human industrial engineers had designed these systems to be self-maintaining and incredibly efficient, but they required periodic calibration using mathematical models that other species couldn't comprehend. Assembly lines that had operated flawlessly for decades simply stopped working as their control systems failed one by one. Agricultural production dropped by 70% as the crop management systems failed on farming worlds throughout the galaxy. Human biotechnicians had developed sophisticated programs that optimized soil conditions and maximized yields using techniques that appeared simple but were actually incredibly complex. Without human oversight, the agricultural computers began making decisions that destroyed crops instead of protecting them. The power grid failures spread from world to world as energy distribution systems overloaded without proper maintenance. Human electrical engineers had built redundancies and safeguards into every major power network, but the safety systems required regular updates using calculations that alien engineers couldn't perform. Major cities were experiencing rolling blackouts as their power plants shut down to prevent catastrophic overloads. Ambassador Catherine Lee monitored the desperate diplomatic communications flooding the emergency channels. The Galactic Council, was receiving reports of civil unrest on dozens of worlds as basic services failed and economies collapsed. The social stability that humans had helped maintain through careful economic planning and diplomatic intervention was breaking down as species blamed each other for the growing crisis. The transportation crisis reached critical levels when the civilian passenger fleet began experiencing system failures. Human safety engineers had designed backup systems for every major spacecraft class, but the redundancies were built using technology that other species couldn't replicate. Passenger ships were being grounded across the galaxy as their navigation, and life support systems failed beyond the ability of alien technicians to repair. The Council's emergency sessions had devolved into shouting matches as member species accused each other of driving humanity away. The Corvan Republic blamed the Celestial Hegemony for being too restrictive in their trade policies. The Zephyrian Trade Federation accused everyone of failing to appreciate human contributions. The arguments accomplished nothing while their civilization continued its steady collapse. President Chris Morgan reviewed the intelligence reports from his office aboard the flagship of humanity's new fleet. The galaxy that had once seemed so vast and powerful now appeared fragile and dependent. Human civilization had grown stronger and more advanced during their journey to the void, while their former neighbors struggled with problems that seemed increasingly impossible to solve. The military situation deteriorated as conflicts erupted across multiple sectors. Human peacekeeping forces had been maintaining stability in regions where ancient enemies were forced to coexist. Without human mediation, these conflicts were exploding into full-scale wars that threatened to spread across the entire galaxy. The careful diplomatic balance that had prevented galactic war for centuries was crumbling. The final insult came when the Galactic Council declared humanity to be galactic criminals and placed bounties on human colonies. What they didn't understand was that humanity's new worlds existed in a completely different dimensional framework that made them unreachable by any known galactic technology. The bounty hunters they sent into the void simply vanished, their ships unable to navigate the dimensional barriers that protected human space. The irony was complete when the Council realized they had no way to enforce their declaration. Humanity had become unreachable and untouchable, existing in a realm beyond galactic influence while possessing technology that made them effectively invincible. The species they had dismissed as primitive had become the most advanced civilization in known space. Dr. Anthony Garcia monitored the final medical reports as the last human-trained alien doctors died or retired. The medical knowledge that humans had shared was proving insufficient to maintain galactic health without human supervision. Diseases that had been eradicated were returning, and new plagues were emerging that nobody knew how to treat. The galaxy stood at the edge of complete collapse, finally understanding what they had lost when they drove humanity away. 2 years after the Exodus, humanity had built something the galaxy had never imagined possible. The new human colonies existed in the vast emptiness between galaxies, where ancient stars provided light for worlds that had been carefully terraformed, using technology that made galactic science look primitive. Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded exploration fleets that discovered star systems so far from known space that they appeared on no galactic charts. The human civilization that emerged in the void was more advanced and prosperous than anything they had achieved while living under galactic oversight. Cities floated in space using gravitational manipulation technology that allowed them to exist without planetary surfaces. Agricultural systems produced food using molecular assembly techniques that created perfect nutrition from basic elements. Energy systems tapped directly into dimensional sources that provided unlimited power. President Chris Morgan stood in the observation center of New Earth Station, watching construction ships build the latest addition to humanity's growing empire. The irony was not lost on him that humanity had needed to leave the galaxy to reach their full potential. Free from the restrictions and expectations of galactic society, human science and engineering had advanced at an incredible pace. The first, contact from the desperate Galactic Council came through an automated probe that had somehow navigated the dimensional barriers protecting human space. The probe carried a message that would have been unthinkable just 3 years earlier. The mighty Galactic Council was begging humanity to return and save their crumbling civilization. Ambassador Catherine Lee reviewed the Council's offer in the diplomatic chambers of the flagship Destiny's Call. The galaxy was willing to grant humans full Council membership with complete voting rights and total sovereignty over their territories. They offered unlimited access to galactic resources, permanent seats on all major committees, and the right to veto any decision that affected human interests. The desperation in the galactic message was obvious to everyone who read it. 3. Major civilizations had collapsed entirely since humanity's departure. The Zephyrian Trade Federation was offering complete control of their shipping networks in exchange for human engineers to restart their failing infrastructure. The Celestial Hegemony was pleading for human doctors to combat the plagues that were spreading unchecked across their worlds. Dr. Lisa Martinez analyzed the medical crisis reports that had accompanied the Council's plea for help. The situation was worse than even the most pessimistic human projections had predicted. Diseases that human doctors had routinely cured were now killing millions across the galaxy. The medical knowledge that humans had shared was proving useless, without human expertise to guide its application. The Corvan Republic had sent a separate message offering humanity complete territorial autonomy and military protection in exchange for assistance with their industrial crisis. Their manufacturing systems had failed so completely that they could no longer produce basic necessities for their population. Entire worlds were experiencing shortages of food, medicine, and power as their infrastructure continued to collapse. General Patricia Adams reviewed the military situation from her command center aboard the fleet's primary warship. The galaxy was experiencing conflicts on a scale not seen for centuries. Without human peacekeepers to mediate disputes and maintain diplomatic balance, ancient enemies had resumed wars that threatened to destroy entire star systems. The careful peace that humans had maintained was crumbling into chaos. Commander Helen Foster monitored the increasingly frantic communications from galactic space. The messages showed a civilization in complete meltdown as every system that humans had helped design or maintain simply stopped working. The aliens were discovering that their advanced technology was actually human technology that they had never fully understood. The economic data painted a picture of total financial collapse. The sophisticated models that human economists had used to prevent market crashes were beyond the mathematical capabilities of other galactic species. Banking systems were failing as currencies became worthless and trade networks collapsed. Worlds that had been prosperous were now experiencing poverty on a scale that seemed impossible. Dr. Nicole Baker led the analysis teams studying the galactic crisis from humanity's new research facilities. The breakdown was happening faster than even human scientists had predicted. The interdependence of galactic systems meant that each failure caused multiple additional failures in a cascade that seemed impossible to stop without massive intervention. The transportation networks had failed so completely that many worlds were now isolated from the rest of galactic civilization. The hyperspace gates that connected star systems had shut down when their human-designed control systems failed. Entire sectors were cut off from trade and communication as the galactic infrastructure simply stopped functioning. President Chris Morgan called together humanity's new governing council to consider the galactic plea for assistance. The decision would determine not just the fate of human civilization, but the future of the entire galaxy. The species that had once dismissed humans as primitive were now offering everything they had ever wanted in exchange for salvation. The human response was debated for weeks in the council chambers of New Earth Station. Some argued that humanity had a moral obligation to help species that were suffering through no fault of their own. Others pointed out that the galaxy had made its choice when it rejected human equality and had to live with the consequences of that decision. Captain Ryan Walsh presented the exploration reports that showed humanity's new territory in the void between galaxies. The human colonies were thriving in ways that would have been impossible under galactic oversight. They had built cities that floated in space, developed technology that seemed magical even by human standards, and created a society that was more free and prosperous than anything in known galactic history. The final decision came from President Morgan himself after consulting with every human colony and settlement in their new territory. The response would be broadcast across every communication channel in galactic space using technology so advanced that it could reach any receiver regardless of the current infrastructure failures. The message was simple and direct, translated into every known galactic language for maximum clarity. Humanity appreciated the offer and recognized the sincerity of the Council's desperation. But they had found something better in the vast universe beyond the galactic rim. They had discovered that independence and self-determination were more valuable than any membership or alliance that required them to compromise their principles. The transmission continued with an explanation that humanity had learned to thrive in the infinite darkness between galaxies. They had built a civilization that was advancing at an incredible pace without the restrictions and limitations of galactic politics. They had found new worlds, developed new technologies, and created new possibilities that made their old life seem small and constrained. The final words of the message carried both finality and hope. Humanity wished the galaxy well in solving their current crisis and hoped they would learn from the experience. Perhaps someday they would meet again as true equals among the stars, but that day would only come when the galaxy was ready to accept diversity and independence as strengths rather than threats. As the transmission ended, humanity's exploration, fleets continued their journey into the infinite cosmos, carrying with them the knowledge, determination, and quiet strength that had always made them extraordinary among the stars.